Our program tonight is the community chat. What does it mean to fear the Lord? I'm certain you have been asked this question from time to time, or you might wonder what is involved in fearing the Lord. But before we can look at that, I would like to look at the concept of fear. What is fear? And forgive me if I seem repetitive, but I'd like to make sure that this is clearly defined for us. So let's look at this. Fear is to be afraid. There's some words that we have been using quite often. To be afraid. To be apprehensive. Or it's an unpleasant emotion resulting from the belief that something is dangerous. It's a function of our belief or perception, and it's personal. Can any of you give me an idea from your own space when you have had to deal with fear? Has any of you had to deal with some kind of fear, whether it be the fear of heights or fear of darkness, fear of spiders, fear of something that my wife, for instance, she's so afraid of any creepy crawling critter. Anything that crawls, she hates those. Anything that flies, except birds, she doesn't like them around her, especially if it happens to be a bat. Jamaican we call rat bat, or a big one of those black moths, those big black moths that scares her to death. So yes, Annette, flying things is one thing that people are really very, very afraid of. Now, if you notice that you might be afraid of this particular thing, but someone else might not be afraid of them. When I was a kid, my job was to catch the rats or the mice in the house. I had to make sure that I get on my knees and go whatever corners they go and try to find those creepy crawlers. That was my job, catching the mice. My mom didn't like them at all, so my job was to catch them. So, as again, you might not be afraid of something, but someone else might be. So fear is very, very personal. Some people are afraid to ride. Oh, Kitty K, you're afraid of cats. Wow. That's a weird one. I've never heard someone, you're afraid of lizards. Yes. Anybody else? What are you afraid? Anybody afraid of heights? Wow. Nobody yet? Okay, we'll see who is. But these are some of the things that some of us are afraid of. And I hate, I'm totally, well, I don't want to say it, I don't want to claim it, but I hate flying. I would prefer to drive rather than fly any day. So you can say I am afraid of flying, which is, well, you see, if I want to go to Atlanta, I drive. If I want to go to New York, I drive. If I'm going to Miami, I drive. If I'm going to Jamaica, I drive to Miami and then fly from Miami. I'm crazy. But it is one of those things that I'm afraid of. And it is sometimes illogical, the things that you're afraid of. All right? Kitty K used to catch, you used to catch lizards. Oh my. That's funny. You used to catch lizards. That's unusual for a girl. Matter of fact, I used to use spiders to tease my classmates, but that was a different story. Anyway, let's continue here to see what else we have here. Now, what do you do when you are fearful? When you are fearful, what do you do? Well, some of us stay away from the things that we are fearful of, right? Some of us really shy and stay away. Give me some ideas of what you do. Yes, you pray. When you're fearful, you pray, okay. Some of us use caution in handling the things that we are afraid of. Some of us put up signs, all right? Some of us warn others to stay away from the things that we're afraid of. Some of us study how to use the thing that we're afraid of carefully. And some of us take preventative measures. For instance, I see that, Annette, you're afraid of lizards. Do you then go and play with the lizards, or do you stay away from them? Kitty K, you're afraid of cats. So what do? Do you play with the cats when you see them? Or do you just move away from them completely? All right? You kill them. You kill the lizards. Wow. That's drastic. Well, some of us train ourselves and train others to stay away from these things. And we sometimes show kinds of respect for some of these things that we come across. So when you are afraid, there are several things that you really do to help yourself to move away from the fear that you encounter. Because fear is not a pleasant feeling. It is often incapacitating. It makes you feel a lot of times uncomfortable. I'm certain you don't like to be fearful, because let's say if you're afraid of the dark, do you go into the dark? You try to get a light every time you can, so as not to experience that fear. You know, there was a show on TV some time ago called Fear Factor, and I thought those people were crazy. They're sadists. Nobody should go and try to endure their fear. It's just illogical. Fear is not something that is pleasant. Okay, so let's look at some dangerous stuff. Since fear is dangerous, let's look at some stuff that we would think are dangerous. And some of you can bring out some other stuff here. Let's look at the weather. The weather, for instance, we have a number of things in the weather that we consider dangerous. Storms, the hurricanes that we just had in Florida and North Carolina and Georgia. Some of you here experienced some of that. And the hurricanes were very fearful. Some people evacuated their homes. Some crazy ones decided to stay. All right. Tornadoes is one thing that a lot of people are afraid of. Whenever there's a tornado siren going off, oh my goodness, everybody goes crazy in my house. You know, I try not to go crazy, but everybody goes crazy. Where are the flashlights? Where are the radio? I've got to go in the basement. Oh my. In Florida, you don't have much basements to go into, unfortunately. Yes, there is earthquakes. Some of us are deadly afraid of earthquakes. Earthquakes, to me, is one of the most scary things. When you feel earth moving and you have no control over that. I remember once when I was teaching, when I was at CAST teaching, and there was an earthquake in Jamaica. It was really scary. You know, we felt the building was going to topple over, you know. Some of us have experienced some tsunamis, and tsunamis is really a very scary process. I remember a couple of years ago, we had the tsunami in Japan, and we saw the wall of water coming, and people just couldn't get away from it fast enough. Well, here's some other ones. Here's terrorism. Terrorism is one thing that people are really afraid of. And of course, there's war. War is something that everybody should be afraid of. Now, there's a bomb. When there's a bomb threat, everybody gets crazy. Everybody evacuate the buildings, or whenever there's a bomb threat, everything stops. Everything gets crazy and stop. But let's look at our personal selves. Some of the things that we are personally afraid of. Well, there's a heart attack. A lot of us don't like the thought of having a heart attack or a stroke. Some of us are afraid of getting old. What about being placed in a nursing home? Some of us will hate that concept of being placed in a nursing home. You know, some of us are afraid of death. death is something that frightens us tremendously. What happens when I die? Just, some of us want to die, but we just want to die quickly. We don't want to suffer while we're dying. We don't want to have cancer. We prefer to have a car crash or something, or a plane crash, as long as it happens quickly. I don't want to suffer the pains of going through the agony or thinking about the death that's coming, And of course, in my estimation, though, the most dangerous thing on earth is fire. Fire to me is the most dangerous product or element on the earth. You see, fire is a consuming thing. It consumes everything. If fire is left to roam, it lays the area that it went over totally bare. And have you ever heard of a fire tornado? A fire tornado, that is a horrible kind of thing. A fire tornado, the firefighters will tell you, is one of the most deadly things that you can possibly experience, because that thing kills everything in its path. It's like a tornado and fire mixed together, and it's swirling at some speeds that are unimaginable. Anyway, yet death itself, well, we'll talk about no fear of death soon, because that's coming up shortly. So we see that there are several stuff that causes us to be fearful. Some stuff that are dangerous, that we consider dangerous, and anything that you think is dangerous, you typically would stay away from. Now, here is a question that you would like to consider. Well, is God dangerous? That is a question that is very challenging. Well, water equality dangerous as fire. Well, that probably is true to some degree, but water can be controlled to some degree, except with a tsunami, and you can probably use water to put fire out. So there's some thoughts there. That's good. Water is probably as equally dangerous as fire, because you can drown with water very easily. But anyway, that's a good thought. But back to my question, and this is something that is very, very, very challenging in terms of our thought process about God. The question, is God dangerous? Because remember, we said fear is an uncomfortable feeling, uncomfortable emotion towards something. So if God is not dangerous, why should we fear him? If he's not dangerous, why should we fear him? Very interesting. Well, let me continue, and then you can bring me your thoughts, because the idea is to have you participate. What does the Bible say about God? It is a terrible thing to fall into the hands of a living God. It is a terrible thing to fall into the hands of a living God. And in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 29, it says, God is a consuming fire. So, question then, if God is this consuming fire, and it is a terrible thing to fall in his hands, is he dangerous? That is a very interesting question. I'm gonna leave you with that thought for you to come to your own conclusions. But Moses warns the Israelites that God is jealous and he will not share his glory with any being, any idol or anything. Moses also tells the Israelites that God will consume their enemies. And both the Old and New Testament suggest that God is not to be trifled with. So, the question is God dangerous? Something to consider, because you're asked to fear God. How should we respond then in the Bible when it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom? We should fear God and keep his commands. We should love the Lord our God with all our hearts, our souls, our minds, and keep his covenants. How does that apply? How should we respond to God? I'm going to go through the same couple of thoughts that we had earlier and go in the same vein to talk about how we respond to our threats. What did Kitty K say? Fall prey to his wrath. Okay, that's Annette. God is not, I repeat, not dangerous. Okay, that's interesting. That's very, very demonstrative and written for people that are that at that time not applicable to us. Well, that's interesting. Listen to this. Because God is not to be trifled with, I want to recommend that we stay away from him. Don't use his name in vain. Don't call on God's name without a reason. Don't use his name as if it's something to be cast away. Use caution. Be constantly aware that God is not to be taken for granted. Don't take God for granted. We sometimes do so often take God as if he is a nobody. We ignore him. We don't approach him when he's telling us to do that. We treat him as though he's a plague or somebody to be cast away. We don't attend to him when we need to. So be careful. And I say, put up signs, okay? Make sure you show that you belong to God. Your life, if you are God's child, put signs around you to make people know that you are his. So you should not be trifled with either. Because when people trifle with you, they are trifling with God. So, warn others? Let's warn others about this God that we have, who is a consuming fire. Let's warn others that they need to come to this God, because he has done a lot for us to make us possible to not fear him. Study to know who this God is. Get to know God. If you get to know God, then you don't have to fear him, because you spend time and learn about him, learn about who he is, spend time in the Word, spend time in your devotions, spend time getting to know God personally, so that you can have the ability to develop a relationship with him. Because when you have developed a relationship with him, then there is no need to fear him, because you are in the space that he wants you to be in. And take preventative measures. Take preventative measures. So what you're going to do here is pray. Pray. Keep on praying. Keep on spending time with God. Turn your life over to him so that you can respect who he is and learn to grow into his space. Tell others about this God. If you really fear something, if you fear fire, you train your kids to stay away from the fire. Similarly, train people to get to know God so that they can join you in this space where they can enjoy his favor. And most importantly, just like you respect fire and don't take it for granted, you don't light a match and put it under your couch, do you? Similarly, show respect to God. Be constantly in awe of Him. That's what it means to fear God. Be in awe of God. Awe and reverence is what it means to be fearful of God. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. What that means is that as you respect Him, because one of the definitions of fear is to be in awe of. So we are going to be in awe of God, which is what God is asking us to do. Don't take Him for granted. What did he say, Kitty K? How can I be fearful of someone I hold dear? Someone who truly understands me. You see, the fear here is not being afraid. We're not talking about being afraid. We're talking about being respectful, being constantly in awe. Because the fear we're talking about is not to be afraid, it's to be totally enamored by who this God is. To be so captivated by His power, His majesty, His strength, His awesomeness, that you just cannot take Him for granted. To be, let me go here just to make sure we're on the same page. To be at the space where God is not somebody you ignore. He's not is somebody that you want to be in their presence because you are in awe of them. We have a great and mighty God. Get to know His might. Get to know how awesome He is. At the sound of His voice, He created the entire universe. At the sound of His, matter of fact, Moses, just to see his rear, the people could not tolerate him because his face shone like the sun. That's just a reflection of God. When God is in our presence, my goodness, we should be so overcome by awe. As a matter of fact, if you remember the Mount of Transfiguration, when Peter saw Jesus, he was terrified of who this Jesus was, because He is so awesome, so majestic, so powerful that we cannot tolerate or take Him for granted. So, fear God. Fear God means to respect Him, love Him, comfort Him. It sounds funny when I say comfort Him. We are in love with God. The person you're in love with, you comfort. You spend time in their presence. God wants to spend time in your presence. So you go back and define for yourself, is God dangerous? For those people who don't know Him, He is a consuming fire. For those persons who don't know who God is, my goodness, it's a terrible thing to fall into the hands of a thrice holy God. If you read the Psalms, you'll see what God will do to his enemies and your enemies. As you read through the Psalms, and some of us are going through the Psalms with me, and you're seeing how many times God says that he will destroy his enemies or destroy your enemies. Even Psalm 23, when the foes rise up against me, God destroys them. So God is in fact a consuming fire, and he is awesome, he's powerful, he's majestic, and he should be respected by each and every one of us. Let us fear the Lord and respect him.